In the last video about Loretta Lynn, we talked about how she grew up in the little, backwards town of Butcher Hollow, Kentucky. Of course, as a coal miner's daughter. You can find that video and more in the Loretta Lynn playlist I've started here at Stories of Country Music, and you can find that link in the video description below. Now in this video, we are going to dive deeper into Loretta's life by meeting the man that would absolutely change her life and walk with her on her path to becoming the queen of country music. That man's name was Oliver Lynn. Most called him Mooney, but back home in Kentucky, where he was born, they called him Doolittle. And while Loretta had no idea at the time, her first step to becoming a country music superstar started at a hometown pie social when she was just 15 years old. Now growing up, Loretta and Doolittle had seen each other around town, but they had never met. Doolittle joined the army in World War II, and when Loretta saw him walking by one day, she told her cousin, "Look at him. He looks just like a little toy soldier." But that was before he was shipped off to war when Doolittle was 18 and Loretta was just 12. After the war, 3 years later, things were different. And Loretta was going to find out just how different things were one Saturday night. Now at this pie social, Loretta was sitting on stage in a row with other young ladies as part of a beauty contest. People were bidding on each lady as a way to see who won the contest. The lady who had the highest bid won. Now Loretta, always modest about her looks, was surprised to see the little toy soldier who kept bidding on her. Higher and higher he went, and even though she was fairly certain the other girls were prettier, Doolittle just wouldn't stop. By the end, Doolittle had made sure Loretta won that beauty contest. Now next was the auction for the pies. Now Loretta was not a good cook when she was young. She'd be the first to admit that. But she entered a pie for charity just because everyone else did. And to her surprise, there was Doolittle again, bidding higher and higher. By the time Doolittle won the highest bid for Loretta's pie, Doolittle ended up paying about $100 in today's money. So no doubt, Doolittle had certainly gotten Loretta's attention. Proud as a peacock, he went over to Loretta and decided it was time to try a piece of that pie. He cut up a big old piece, stuffed it straight into his mouth, and spit it right back out. It tasted absolutely terrible. Turns out, Loretta had used salt instead of sugar, so Doolittle threw the rest of that pie right into the garbage can. But Doolittle didn't care. To the victor belonged the spoils, and Doolittle got to walk Loretta to her parents' house that night. Now love moved fast between Doolittle and Loretta. Doolittle started courting Loretta pretty hard, but Loretta's mom and dad didn't like it a bit. They thought she was too young to be dating, especially dating someone 6 years older than her. Now, it wasn't exactly Doolittle's fault, at least at first. He didn't know Loretta was 15 when he was bidding at the pie social. He figured she was a few years older, since she was already full-figured and well-grown. And by the time he found out how old Loretta was, well, he didn't care. Doolittle wanted Loretta, and Loretta wanted Doolittle. In fact, they met in December and planned to have a summer wedding the next year. But one cold winter day in January, just over a month after they met, Doolittle showed up with a big paycheck from the coal mines. He told Loretta that since he had money now, they might as well get married soon. "When?" Loretta asked. "Tomorrow," Doolittle said. Well, Loretta thought that sounded just fine, so they told her parents. Now her parents tried to talk Loretta out of their marriage plans, but the youngsters would have none of it. Eventually, Loretta's dad made Doolittle promise him two things. One, that he would never whip up on Loretta, and two, that he would never move her far away. Doolittle agreed, and Loretta's parents went to bed and cried all night long. The next day, Loretta Webb became Loretta Lynn. Now their honeymoon definitely had its hurdles. We'll just say that Doolittle was more experienced in the enjoyable parts of marriage, while Loretta was completely naive. She has an entire chapter in her autobiography, The Coal Miner's Daughter, called Don't Wear Clothes Under Your Nightgown, which is exactly what she did on her first night with Doolittle. The honeymoon story Loretta tells in her book is quite interesting and definitely worth the read. But apparently, they got the honeymoon situation resolved pretty quickly because 4 months later, Loretta was pregnant and she had her first baby when she was just 16. Now, when Loretta says she was naive about the ways of life, here's an example. When she found out she was pregnant, she had a hard time sleeping because she thought she might have the baby in the middle of the night without knowing it, and she was scared she would smother it to death. So she definitely had a lot of learning to do. But she had to do all of that learning far, far away from her home in Kentucky. Because a year later, when Loretta was pregnant with their second child, Doolittle moved the small family to the state of Washington, far away from the Kentucky home and breaking the promise he had made with Loretta's dad. You see, Doolittle had seen firsthand what the mines do to young men in Kentucky, and he wanted no part of it. Having lived in Washington for a short while before, he moved out there, found a job on a farm, and came back to get pregnant Loretta and the baby. And things kept moving fast. Loretta had her second child when she was 17 and her third and fourth children when she was just 19. By her early 20s, Loretta was the mother of 4, working barefoot out in the fields on the farm and busy raising a family. Certainly a far cry from a country music superstar. But in Washington, music started taking a hold of Loretta's life. When Loretta was about 18, Doolittle bought her a guitar. Now, Loretta played around with it a little, but never took it seriously. But one time, Loretta was strumming and singing, and Doolittle walked by and said she had a nice voice, and that he thought she should sing more. Well, Loretta was just as pleased as could be that someone had noticed her singing, so when the kids were in school or asleep, she would sit around and play the guitar and sing. Now in Kentucky, when she was a little kid, she had written songs every once in a while, so she started doing that again too. This went on for a few months before Doolittle told Loretta she should go out and sing in public. Now Loretta didn't want to because she was terribly bashful and shy, but Doolittle wouldn't let up and set her up in the clubs to play anyway. As Loretta says, this is when Doolittle started running her career, and just like the auction at the pie social, he just never stopped. If it wasn't for Doolittle, Loretta says, she would still be a housewife out working in the fields in Washington. Now before long, Loretta was singing regularly in the local clubs, had formed her own band, and even won a talent contest put on by Buck Owens. That led her to being signed to a label contract, which led to her first recording, which led to her touring all down the West Coast, which eventually led her to Nashville, where she would never leave, living there still today. And her journey to Nashville is the next Loretta Lynn video I'll be making, but that's a story for another day.